Hello, my friends. Welcome back. So today I wanted to do a video on 3 things that narcissistic victims have in common with narcissists, and 1 thing they have completely and totally different. And this video was inspired because yesterday in the Thriver School of Transformation, we were talking about the drama triangle, right? That was our theme for the month. And somebody put in the chat box, why is it that victims of narcissistic abuse need validation and narcissists themselves need validation as well? Like, why do they both crave the same thing if they're on 2 opposite ends of the spectrum? And it was such a good question. So that's where this video was inspired from. So let's dive in. For those that don't know me, my name is Michele. I'm a life and relationship coach. I'm the founder of the Thriver School of Transformation, which is a monthly membership where we meet together live with people all over the world and we do the inner work together. And I'm also the founder of the Trauma-Informed Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Coaching Certification Program, which the next class begins in October. So if either of those resources are something you'd be interested in, I will leave the link there for you to check out. Let's talk about shame. Both victims of narcissistic abuse and individuals that become covert narcissists in particular. Okay. The overt narcissist is a little bit different. So I'm just really talking, when I'm talking in this video about narcissists, I'm really focusing more on the covert narcissist. So the truth is that most, I'm not going to talk in all or nothing terms. So most covert narcissists themselves started out as a victim of narcissistic abuse. And what they have in common, right? Now they're adult narcissists and they abuse victims of narcissistic abuse. What they have in common is they both have a shame wound. Narcissists breed narcissists. It becomes generational. It becomes a family system that is passed on from one generation to the next. And so a child that grows up feeling as if they are not allowed to be a separate individual grows up into a person that doesn't see people as separate individuals. A child that views a parent, when a parent is feeling something, instead of working through their emotions, they fling it onto others, grows up to be an adult that projects instead of deals with their own stuff going on. Okay, so in other words, it's learned behavior that becomes intertwined in your psyche and it becomes a part of who you are. So that's the route that covert narcissists take. But going back to that shame wound. Okay, so a child that has neglectful parents, a child that is dealing with trauma in childhood with no one to help them through it, a child that has narcissistic parents has that shame wound. And that shame wound is that in their childhood, when they should have been loved, cherished, and accepted for just existing, right? For just being, they weren't made to feel like they could have that unconditional love. Love was conditional. So because love was conditional, that meant because you didn't have it, there was something wrong with you and or you were bad. Those are the beliefs that are formed when you have a environment or a narcissistic parent that doesn't give you that unconditional love. So there's that shame wound. The victim of narcissistic abuse, the adult victim of narcissistic abuse, what they did with that shame wound was different than what the narcissist did. Okay, so the first thing is they have a shame wound, both of them, which is why they both need validation from outside of self, because they're unable to see that they are okay just as they are, that they are worthy and enough. Because in order to believe that in adulthood, we needed a parent to mirror our worth to us in childhood. And when you didn't get that, you grow up still thinking that you need it from outside of self. Okay, so there's that shame wound they have in common. The second thing is that they both have a false core. Children that grow up to be covert narcissists, when they feel that shame wound in childhood, it is so painful. It is horrible. No child should ever have to experience that. It is emotional abandonment, which breeds a fear of physical abandonment, because the child knows that they can't live alone. They know that their survival is dependent on that person. So that abandonment is a life and death situation for that child. It is super, super painful. So the child that grows up to be the covert narcissist, what they do with that shame so that they don't feel it is they develop a false image of they're so perfect and they're so amazing. And they spend their life polishing that image instead of working on themselves. They polish that image and they see life through this false core. This is who I am. And to keep that false core alive is they're seeking narcissistic supply. Getting people to see them a certain way is what keeps it alive. Now, the crazy thing is instead of just becoming what they want to be, they keep that false core, they polish the false core and they leave all their emotional junk unattended. This is why in a narcissistic family system, a narcissistic parent with children, the friends of their children will think your parent is amazing. Everyone thinks that person is amazing except the members of the own family. And they're like, what's wrong? Like, how come we're not seeing the same thing? And that's because the covert narcissist puts on their false core, their false self, almost like a coat, right? They put it on when they go out of the house. And when they come back in the house, they hang it up. So again, they have that false core. It's called a false self. And they live life through the lens of that false self. Victims of narcissistic abuse have a false self as well. Again, we develop false selves when our authentic selves are rejected. And if you experienced conditional love, your authentic self was rejected. The difference is that the victim of narcissistic abuse will call it a protective self. It's still a false self, but it's a protective self. And so what that protective self does is it tries to minimize the pain of the abuse that the child is undergoing. The narcissistic parent teaches you that your needs don't matter, right? So what happens with your protective self is that anytime you go to think about something that you want to do, anytime you think about something that means something to you, your protective self will throw you into fight or flight to make you uncomfortable so that you don't go there. And what it's doing is it's keeping you from being authentic, not because you want to be fake, but because when you were authentic in birth and when you were a toddler, the pain of the rejection was so severe that the protective self is like, I'm going to do everything and anything to keep you from being authentic. So you become a people pleaser. You become somebody that is always doing, like a human doing instead of a human being. You make your life about making other people happy. So they both have false cores, but what they do with those false cores is different. The narcissist, their false core is all about making themselves important and making themselves, absolutely amazing and on top of the world. And the victim of narcissistic abuse, their false core is about making sure everyone else is amazing so that they're safe. The third thing that they have in common is they learned again in childhood to be emotional regulators for their parents or for other people. And so when they become adults, both the narcissist and the victim of narcissistic abuse, they struggle with regulating their own emotions, if at all, right? And they spend their lives, okay, let me actually separate it. Let's break it down. The narcissist, they don't regulate their own emotions. So what they do is when they're feeling something that they don't like, let's say they're feeling shame or fear or anxiety, they will provoke it in someone else because that's what was done, right? In childhood, the narcissist doesn't regulate their own emotions. They project it out. So they will provoke it in someone else. And so what happens as they live life through the lens of their false core, the false core sees the other person with anxiety and is like, oh, that anxiety that I thought I felt, it really isn't mine. Look, it's theirs. I'm good. And that's why every time in relationships with covert narcissists, the more they can rile you up, the more calm and peaceful they are because they are regulating themselves through you. Okay. And they do this to avoid responsibility, taking responsibility for their own actions. They do this to avoid seeing their wounds and healing them. They're too perfect to have wounds. So rather than seeing their wounds, they will fling them onto someone else. The victim of narcissistic abuse doesn't know how to regulate their emotions either, because they were taught that their job is to regulate the emotions of someone else. So they don't know how to emotionally regulate their emotions. What they tend to do is they don't even pay attention to what's going on inside. They're so busy trying to make other people happy, trying to regulate the emotions of other people, that they neglect their own emotional needs, or they strive to get the person in their life, the significant other in their life, or their friends, to meet their emotional needs. In other words, if the victim of narcissistic abuse feels unlovable, rather than finding ways to see how lovable they are through their own eyes, it's almost like they feel like they can't unless somebody else sees that they're lovable. And so they're always striving and running in that hamster wheel to get somebody to see their value, because they don't feel capable of seeing it through their own eyes. That's the learned helplessness that comes about as a result of narcissistic abuse, which, by the way, can be overcome. Okay, so those are 3 things they have in common. So let's talk about the one thing. Actually, it's not the one thing. Let's talk about one thing that they have different, because there are many, many differences. But for the sake of this video, I just wanted to talk about one. Okay. And one of the things that they have different is the fact that a victim of narcissistic abuse has the ability to self-reflect, has the ability to eventually. Now, it starts out, it's really hard to do in the beginning, because the focus of a victim of narcissistic abuse is very much on what the narcissist did and what they didn't do. And it's very much stuck in story. This happened and that happened. They did this, they said that. And their mind is almost stuck there for a while. But they can, once they resolve and validate their truth, right? Because the reason it gets stuck is because nobody's validating their truth and they don't feel they can. Once that happens, they can self-reflect and begin to see their wounds and to begin working on them. And the inner work to work on shame wounds is hard. It's hard work. It takes courage. It takes patience. It takes consistency. But a victim of narcissistic abuse, once they see that this pattern isn't going away, they're willing to do it. They're willing to get uncomfortable. They're willing to see their part. They're willing to take responsibility for the areas in their life where they're showing up in ways that are unhealthy with self and unhealthy with others. And they're able to grow because they're willing to see it. A narcissist, on the other hand, a covert narcissist, especially the higher up on the scale they are. Okay, so obviously this is a scale. So it's not in, this is exactly how it is in every situation. But if they're really high up on that scale, it's like they refuse to see themselves. They do no wrong. They can do no wrong. They have no wounds, right? They'll be like, no, you're the one that's messed up. You're the one that's totally screwed up. I'm totally fine. They have zero accountability, zero self-reflection, zero ability to see reality outside of the lens of that false self that they created. So we can't change what we don't acknowledge. And as a result, people that are really high up on that scale tend to stay that way or get worse as the years go on. So those are 3 similarities and 1 difference. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section below.